Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah. Friends, we have been discussing about several great women of our country. We've heard several of these names. We know many of these names. Today, I think we should remind ourselves of some of the women whose names we all know and we have been hearing repeatedly. One such name is Arundhati. Many of us know Arundhati was the wife of sage Vasishtha. In grammar and in philosophy, there is something called Arundhati Darshana Nyaya. The logic or the system of learning by what is called Arundhati Darshan. Arundhati had been so great and she is respected so much that a process of learning or a process of wisdom itself is named after her. And what did she do? She was sage Vasishtha's wife. It is said that she had so much of power and so much of luminescence that her name itself means that she derived all that luminescence from the sun. Aruna is something related to the sun or the early rays of the sun. When the sun ascends up, we call it Suryodaya. And there is something called Arunodaya. What is this Arunodaya? If you see the eastern sky early in the morning, you will first see the sky is reddish in hue. This red color is the Aruna color. Aruna means red. So when there is a spread of red across the eastern sky, we call it Arunodaya. It is also sometimes said that Aruna is the charioteer of Lord Sun. So when the sun comes seated on his chariot, the chariot is being driven by Aruna. And that is why Aruna appears first and then the solar rays come. Now it doesn't matter whether Aruna is the charioteer or sometimes even the sun is called Aruna. It is that the reddish hue or the reddish rays go by the name Aruna. And here we have a woman who was called Arundhati, meaning all her power and all her luminescence is from those rays. Now, what does this mean? When the eastern sky is red in color, we get some kind of confidence, isn't it? The moment we see that, we think the night is over, the darkness is over, and we have the sky being lit up now, we have a day, we have the incoming light, we have a day of light, and we can see light in our life. The same way, Arundhati gave confidence and light, the light of wisdom, to others. She always stood by sage Vasishtha And whatever good things he wanted to do, she was always by his side. It is sometimes said in certain Puranas that all her 100 sons were destroyed by the curse of sage Vishwamitra. We all know sage Vishwamitra on one side and sage Vasishta on the other were at loggerheads always. So it is said that sage Vishwamitra cursed the sons of sage Vasishta, and there were 100 of them, and all 100 of them perished. What would have been the plight of the mother to lose all her sons? But then Arundhati would not give up her equanimity. She did not curse someone else for the sake of losing her sons. If you think of Gandhari at this point of time, we all know Gandhari also had 100 sons. Gandhari of the Mahabharata. But then Gandhari was so attached to her sons, in fact, partially having some kind of affection towards them. Partial in the sense she did not have partial affection towards the sons, but then she was so partial towards others. She had a favoritism for her sons, because of which, when her sons perished, they perished because of their own doing. But then Gandhari cursed everybody else, including Lord Krishna. But then here we have Arundhati, who lost her sons not because of any mistake committed by them, not because of any mistake committed by the father Vasishta, but because of the jealousy of sage Vishwamitra. The sons of Arundhati were good people. They were good-hearted, but they perished because Vishwamitra was jealous of Vasishta. Arundhati would not curse back. Arundhati would not lose her equanimity. She stood neutral. Yes, it was a great loss for her. But then, because she was grief-struck, she would not want the same kind of misery before others. And that is why Arundhati is always held in respect. It is also said in some other Puranas that she had another son apart from these 100. When the 100 died, Vasishta and Arundhati had another son who was called Shakti. And this Shakti's son was sage Parasara. And sage Parasara's son was sage Vyasa, this great Veda Vyasa. Thereby, Arundhati was the grandmother of sage Parasara and the great-grandmother of Veda Vyasa. Imagine the position that she commanded. And there is something called Arundhati Darshana Nyaya. What is this? Vasishta was one of the Sapta Rishis. If you see the sky, there are 7 stars, the 7 stars in a cluster. And these 7 stars are usually shaped like a sickle. You know, the sickle with which you can cut. So, like a sickle, these 7 stars are placed. And this cluster of 7 stars is usually called the Sapta Rishi Mandalam, or astronomically it is called the Ursa Major. One of the stars in Ursa Major is, of course, Vasishta. And If you notice deeply, keen observation, you will find the star Vasishta is accompanied by a lesser shining star, and it is customary to call that star as Arundhati. It is that these two stars are always placed together. The entire Ursa Major may move. In the months of April, May, you can see Ursa Major just in the northern sky, not at the zenith but a little lower. That is the time when the Ursa Major is seen very clearly. So when you notice, you find Vasishta and Arundhati are always close, indicating Arundhati never left the side of Vasishta, and she always was a support in all the good activities, dharmic activities that Vasishta did. And it is also customary that during the marriages, in a marriage, the man and the bride get married, and we wish them years of togetherness. So, in a bid to tell them that you would have to be like Vasishta and Arundhati, there is a part of the marriage ritual that Arundhati is shown to the bride and the groom, especially to the bride. That is Arundhati Darshan. Amidst certain mantras, the bride will be taken to a place and then shown, see Arundhati there. Why? It is a kind of a upadesha to the bride that you would have to be like Arundhati in your life. Today you're getting married, and please think that you would have to be a support to your husband, like how Arundhati was a support to Vasishta. But when you show Arundhati, the star is not very clearly seen. The star is a little less luminescent than Vasishta. So what they normally do is, see there, can you see the bright star there? Yes, I can. First thing, can you see that sickle shape? Yes, I can. Now slowly focus. In that sickle, you are able to see a brighter star? Yes, I can. Once you see that bright star, slowly move your vision adjacent to that bright star. There you find a less bright star, and that is Arundhati. And then once this step is followed, the bride is able to see the less bright one. Yes, now I can see the bright star and the less bright one adjacent. So I understand this is Vasishta and this is Arundhati. This kind of learning, first learning something which is already known, and from that known, the unknown is learnt. This kind of learning is called Arundhati Darshan. Let us see an example. You want to teach a child as to how the globe looks. The earth is a globe, right? You want to tell a child, a small little child, that the earth is globular. The child cannot understand. And what do? We take a small ball that the child has. The child is playing with a ball. We take that ball and give the child and say, this is the ball. Imagine the earth is a big ball. It is something like a ball. So teaching something unknown through the way of the known is what is called Arundhati Darshan. So we have Arundhati Darshana Nyaya. And Arundhati shines there, looking at all of us with her equanimity, with her magnanimity. And we remember Arundhati as one of those women who had been a virtue of values. Similarly, we have many women whose names we all know, we are familiar with. Now, thinking about Arundhati and her equanimity, even at the time of losing her children, I'm reminded of another person who lived probably sometime in the 16th century, somewhere around 1522. Now, Arundhati was a historic or a prehistoric personality. We do not know exactly the time when Arundhati lived. But then here we know of a woman who had almost the same kind of magnanimity or even greater. I'm referring to a woman who was able to give her own child to the pangs of death when she had to save another child. Mewar, we all know, was a big kingdom, and Mewar was being ruled by Rana Sanga. Rana Sanga had two sons, and of course, after his death, another son was born to him. His wife, the Rani, was pregnant when Rana Sanga died. The neighboring people came for a war with Rana Sanga, and Rana Sanga was killed by wicked means. And on the death of Rana Sanga, his elder son took up the throne, and he was also killed after some time. His second son, who was called Vikrama, came to throne, and Vikrama ruled for some time. At which point of time, Vikrama's younger brother, the third son of Rana Sanga, who was born to Rana Sanga and Rani Karnavati, was a very small child. His name was Uday Singh, and Rani Karnavati had an assistant in the form of Panna. She was called Panna Bai. Panna Bai was bringing up Uday Singh. Not only that, she was literally feeding Uday Singh. She was a nurse. We call her Panna Dai, Datri Panna sometimes. Her name was Panna. Panna means emerald. But she was very often referred to as Panna Dai, Dai meaning the nurse. She was called the nurse primarily because she used to nurse Uday Singh. She also had a small child of the same age by name Chandan. So whenever Chandan was there, she also used to nurse this little boy Uday Singh. And it so happened Vikrama, who was the ruler, was not in good terms with several other people. And Vikrama was being opposed. There was a person by name Banveer. This Banveer was in a way a relative of the entire family. Banveer wanted to kill Vikrama and his small little child brother. Banvir did not want this family to rule, so he wanted to kill the brothers. He knew Panna was keeping the child in her room. So he barged into the room. Panna knew this is what is going to happen and he has come in search of the child. He barged into the room and asked where that Uday Singh is. Uday Singh was in the same room. You know what Panna did? She took the child, Uday Singh. She had some information that Banvir is coming in search of this child. She wanted to save this child. So she took that child, wrapped in good clothing, and gave the child to another person, told him, please take this child and go away. So he took that child and went away. And that is the time when Banvir came in. Banvir came in and asked for Uday. She could not tell him that the child has been taken away. That would be letting down the Uday Singh and the entire family. So what she did, she just pointed to the cradle where her own son Chandan was sleeping. Banvir did not know how the child looked like. He had not seen the child. Knowing that, she just pointed to the cradle and said, that is Uday Singh. And in the bargain, Banvir ran to that cradle and killed Chandan. The mother was witnessing her own child getting killed. But then she just controlled herself and stood like a rock there. Why? Because she wanted to save the future Maharaja of that land. She wanted to save Uday Singh. She knew Vikramaditya or Vikrama, who was later called Vikramaditya, died. There is so much of animosity between Banvir and Vikrama that one day Banvir will kill Vikrama. But then she wanted to save this child. So she sent the child away to save custody, but then gave her own son as a kind of a bait. And this son was killed right in front of her eyes. She would stand there, not give away, not give out any emotions, but just like a rock, she would stand there, witnessing her own son being killed. History records that later on, Uday Singh, who was brought up somewhere in a forest area in hiding, claimed the throne and he did rule, and subsequently Uday Singh's son also ruled Mewar. Mewar was able to get its king and its ruler primarily because of the sacrifice made by Panna Dai. She is called Panna Dai or Datri Panna. For those of us who would have been wonderstruck by the equanimity shown by Arundhati, for those of us who would have questioned if it is possible for a mother to sacrifice so, here is the answer in Panna Dai. Arundhati was prehistoric. If we think, we do not know when she lived exactly, we do not know the dates correctly. But then Panna Dai, we know the dates, somewhere around 1522, that is the 16th century. How was it possible? How was that kind of magnanimity possible for Panna Dai? It was the kind of values that she had. She wanted the land to have a good ruler. She thought of the common good. She thought of the country. She thought of the welfare of the country and not her own personal whims, fancies, wishes, and emotions. If we think that common good is more important, if we think the welfare of everybody is equally important, it is possible to have people like Panadai. And that is where we see so many great women of India have lived like this. Many of them, not one or two. If we go to every region of this country, we will definitely be able to find such great women. Many of their names we do not even know. And they were all like roots. You have a big tree, you have a huge tree. When you look at the tree, you're able to see the branches, the leaves, the foliage. But then, are we able to see the roots? The roots are hidden. Something like that. These women were like the roots of our culture. These women are the roots which keep up the pride of this nation. When we think of plants and roots and trees, I'm reminded of two great women and the kind of a small little Cold War that went on between them. I'm referring to two Dharmapatnis of Lord Krishna. We all know Lord Krishna had 8 Dharmapatnis. One of them was Rukmini, or the senior most queen consort. Of course, third in line was Satyabhama. Satyabhama was the daughter of King Satrajit. King Satrajit had a very prized, coveted stone called the Shyamantaka. And when Krishna was able to find out where the Shyamantaka was and get it back to Satrajit, Satrajit, in appreciation, gave his daughter in marriage to Krishna, and that is how Satyabhama was married to Krishna. Satyabhama is generally depicted as an incarnation of Bhuma Devi. Goddess Earth was born as Satyabhama. Satyabhama was a very valorous person. Not only that, she was a wonderful charioteer. We all know the story of Deepavali. Deepavali is supposed to be the day when Narakasura was killed. That is why the prime day of Deepavali is Naraka Chaturtasi. On that day, Naraka was killed. Now, what is the story behind? Naraka was the son of Bhuma Devi and Lord Vishnu. We all know Bhuma Devi is one of the consorts of Lord Vishnu. So it was that when Lord Vishnu as Varaha went down to save Bhuma Devi, that they had a son, and this son was called Narakasura. He was originally called Naraka, but then his behavior was so asuric that he came to be called Narakasura. And this Naraka had also taken a boon. You know what the boon was? I should be killed, if at all I am killed, by only my mother. I should be killed only by my mother and none else. So it is that Bhuma Devi only will have to kill Naraka. And Naraka was so demonic that the entire cosmos suffered. And that is when all the inhabitants of the 14 worlds ran to Krishna and asked for some kind of solace. They wanted Krishna to take some steps so that they could be saved of Naraka's torture. And Krishna decided that he would go for a kind of a war with Naraka. Naraka ruled from a town called Prajotishapuram, which is supposed to have been somewhere in the modern day Assam. And Krishna knew that Naraka had this kind of a boon that he could be killed only by his mother. So Krishna asked Satyabhama to accompany him. Satyabhama, being the incarnation of Bhuma Devi, also went with Krishna, drove the chariot. And as they went in and there was a big fight between the two sides, Krishna feigned as though he was falling down, and Naraka from the opposite side was aiming all his arrows on Krishna. He was so happy that Krishna himself was falling down. But then Krishna was only acting. He was feigning as though he was falling down. And Satyabhama, seeing that Naraka's arrows were targeting Krishna, got very angry and took the bow and the arrows and targeted the arrows at Naraka. And Satyabhama's arrows killed Naraka, thereby bringing that boon to fulfillment, that Naraka would be killed by his mother alone. Naraka realized, of course, his mistake and then requested Krishna that the day of his death should be celebrated by people because that is destruction of asuric tendency, and that is why we have Naraka Chaturdasi being celebrated as Deepavali. But then see that valor of Satyabhama. Without Satyabhama, Krishna would not have been able to succeed over Naraka. But the same Satyabhama also had a weakness. She was generally a little short-tempered. And then she was also a little jealous. So once she asked Krishna for a very, very strange gift. She kept on looking at Krishna and she knew Krishna had an extra soft corner for Rukmini. So she wanted to prove that she is better than Rukmini. So she asked Krishna, Krishna, will you get me something, a special gift for me? She thought by getting that special gift, she could prove that she is better than Rukmini, who is an ordinary person. Of course, Rukmini was the incarnation of Sri Devi, but to Satyabhama, she was something very ordinary. Krishna agreed and Satyabhama asked for the Parijata tree from Devaloka. Krishna went to Devaloka, fought with Indra and brought the Parijata tree and planted it in Satyabhama's garden. Satyabhama was very happy, a little proud too that she has the Parijata tree of the Devaloka in her garden. And the tree grew. But you know what happened? The plant, as it grew, it spread its branches, and some of the branches went across the fencing to the garden of Rukmini. The branches were on that side. Many of the branches went to that side. And every day Satyabhama was watering this plant. And when it was time for the plant to bloom and give its flowers, most of the flowers were on the side of the branches which were in Rukmini's garden. That is when Satyabhama realized that it is not the possession of the plant, but then the fruits of the plant or the flowers of the plant have gone to that side. That is when her jealousy subsided. Now, why is this story? Satyabhama, Rukmini, both of them were great women. But then it is to show that anything related to Bhumi, anything related to the earth, is likely to have that kind of jealousy and that kind of pride. Think of it. All of us are born in this earth. So those of us, we can also have a little pride and little jealousy. This story or this drama was only to tell us a lesson that we should not have that pride and jealousy like Satyabhama. On one side, she was a great person. Many of us have many talents, but these talents are riddled by little drops of jealousy and little drops of pride. Those little drops of jealousy and pride should not be there. That is why Satyabhama and Rukmini, along with Krishna, enacted a kind of a drama, and we have a lesson to learn. Please remember the names of all these women so that every time we remember these names, we get reminded of what we can learn from these women. So, next time we shall meet again with some more names and some more anecdotes about great women of India. Thank you.